Okay, so good evening, everybody. Glad you're here. We're going to talk about lizards and snakes tonight, um, and get a little bit into venomous snake bite and that kind of stuff, but all the other stuff too about lizards and snakes. Well, all of it that we can cram into 2 hours anyway. Um, and it'll be posted on our YouTube channel. It's Friends of SCNP. um, is where you'd find it. So if you miss tonight and look it up, that's where it'll be. Um, okay, let's start sharing. So you should see a big Western diamondback rattlesnake. I know I'm really kind of focusing on North Texas, so this is cheating a little bit. This photo is from South Texas. South Texas is known for having some of the biggest Western diamondbacks, and this one was pretty big, um, and and very laid back um, in terms of taking a few photos. We didn't do a whole lot with him, but we were careful with him, and I got a few photos, and he was very obliging, and then we sent him on his way. So let's see where these things come from. So lizards and snakes are collectively known as squamates. So there's some stuff that you don't find around here, like worm lizards, um, the amphibians. But at any rate, if you look at the chart, you see amniotes getting started way back when, and then you have a group that splits into what becomes turtles, crocodilians, and birds, and then the others become lepidosaurs. And of that Lepidosauria group, one of them becomes a sphenodon. That's that weird little guy in New Zealand, and everybody else becomes squamata, or we call them squamates. And that chart shows them dividing into the geckos, the snakes, and then three other groups of lizards, the iguanians, the agamids, and the chameleons. And don't worry too much about the technicality of all that stuff. It's mainly just showing that lizards and snakes are pretty closely related, and and collectively they're called squamates. So what are the similarities and differences? Some of you know this already, but lizards have eyelids. Snakes have an eye covered by a clear scale. So if you see something with eyelids that close, it cannot be a snake. Um, Lizards mostly have ear openings, except for the earless lizards, and we'll look at one of those and talk about that in a bit. But mostly lizards have ear openings and snakes do not. Mostly lizards have four legs, even if they're small legs. Those of you that are familiar with the little brown skink know that that's a lizard, but it's easy to overlook those little legs. So the exception is the glass lizard, and I have a photo that we'll look at of the glass lizard that has no legs, but it's not a snake. Whereas snakes have no legs. The boas, the Boidae, that family, have vestigial spurs that you could look at, in an X-ray, and they have little claws by the anal scale, but no legs. Okay, back over to lizards. A few of them reproduce by parthenogenesis. That is, there'll be a population of all females. If you go out in West Texas, some of the race runner lizards out there, there's a species or two that have all female. Uh, uh, wow, we got. I don't know if you're seeing lines across the screen, but I don't know where those came from. It's not me. Anyway, some of those reproduce by parthenogenesis. There are a few snakes, and not of them in Texas that we know of, but a few snakes that can sometimes reproduce by parthenogenesis. Um, Overall, it's very rare in snakes. So here's the things that both of them share. In both of them, males have hemipenes. Now, those are paired copulatory organs. So instead of having a penis, males have two hemipenes. They are kept inverted inside the tail, so you don't see them externally. And a minority of both of them retain eggs and have live birth. And we'll talk about a couple of those snakes. There's not much in the way of the lizards. Most of them lay eggs. So those are some similarities and differences. Um, Anybody else seeing this red line?
Yeah, I see it. Somebody
Yep.
I'm
drew
gonna,
accidentally.
okay, I'm gonna stop share and I'll go back to sharing. And maybe that'll take care of it. Okay, so, all right. So let's talk about the lizards a little bit. So in North Texas, the families, and unless you're really worried about, if you're really interested, I've listed the families there. Mainly, it's just a way of grouping lizards that have something in common or some relatedness. So there's the family of geckos that where what we have is the Mediterranean gecko. There's the family, the Dactyloideae, that are anoles. And then there's a couple of families of skinks, and the family that includes race runners and whiptails. There's a family that include collared lizards. There's a family that includes legless lizards. And then there's the Phrynosomatidae is spiny lizards, earless lizards, and historically Texas horned lizards. So that's kind of how the lizards shake out in North Texas. That's how they were grouped. And we'll talk about at least one representative of each of those. So here's a Mediterranean gecko. You guys I'm sure you've seen them, right? Um, on your house, probably by your porch light at night. So these are exotic and not terribly invasive, although I guess you might call them invasive in the sense that they are spreading slowly. I don't know anybody that could tell us any harm that they do. Um, I have found them. Gosh, we found one on the Pecos River in the Trans Pecos, right? Like right at the beginning of the Chihuahuan Desert. Uh, on a rocky banks of the Pecos River. That's not exactly somebody's house, right? That's not exactly urban. We usually think of Mediterranean geckos as following human habitations, but like, where the heck that guy come from, right? So occasionally you'll see them out in the wild, but mostly you'll see them around houses and buildings and stuff. And they're nocturnal. These are lizards that have this kind of vague pattern that you see. The little white things are tubercles, the little knobby or pimple-like things that stick up from the skin. The eyes are big and vertical, and they're very nocturnal. And that's Mediterranean geckos. Sometimes they lay eggs in your garage. People find little eggs, and they're Mediterranean gecko eggs sometimes. So that is our gecko. Out in West Texas, if you did go to the Trans Pecos, we got a couple of kinds of native geckos, and they're really cool. If you get out there, Texas banded gecko is a pretty common lizard, and they are way neat. Anyway, on to the anoles. So basically, we're talking about the green anole. We are beginning to pop up with some of that invasive brown anole that doesn't belong here, but mostly you're up here, mostly you will see green anoles. These, as you know, they can become brown, they can turn either brown or green. That seems to have to do with temperature and arousal, like if they're cold or stressed out, they may turn brown. If they are lively and basking, or if they're excited, they're that bright green there. And under the chin, of course, they've got that pink fan, the dewlap that they can extend. The males will do that. They'll extend that dewlap and they'll do push-ups, and basically, like, they'll do it looking at you. They'll say, "Hey, what are you doing in my territory? You get out of here." Um, it seemingly, I mean, if you get close enough, they'll run away. But basically, the males will threaten anything else that gets close. One of the things that you might see this time of year, since a lot of them are mating, and you don't usually see, is that males can actually have a kind of a crest on the back of the neck, a kind of a fold of that green skin, and behind the eye, a kind of a black mask. So if you see something that looks like a green anole, but it looks like it has a little crest and a black mask, that's a male that's all jazzed up for breeding uh, and running off other males and that kind of stuff. That's what's going on. He will come back to looking just like the one in the photo at some point. We're kind of near the western edge of their range. If you get into East Texas and especially down near the Big Thicket, you find green anoles everywhere. Up here, they're more like in our yards where we water and it doesn't get quite as dry. But so we're kind of close to the edge of their range. The skinks. This is the little brown skink. I'm sure almost everybody has seen these, right? You find them in the leaf litter and wooded areas largely. Um, and they slither away. You just kind of hear a disturbance in the leaves, and maybe you see something slithering away that looks almost like a snake. And it's this little two-tone kind of coppery brown and other brown lizard. That's the little brown skink. In some of the older books, you'll find it listed as the ground skink. Um, this is a young broad-headed skink. Uh, and the deal about five anterior labial scales is this. Broad-headeds and five lines are really hard to tell apart. You can tell that this is a younger skink because the lines are bright. This animal, actually, you can't see the tail. This animal had a blue tail. So when they're hatched, they have electric blue tails. They're really gorgeous. And they're very dark brown with these light stripes. And the stripes begin to fade as they get bigger and older. And the males lose the stripes pretty much altogether. And they have some orange around the head. Um, and the broadheadeds get maybe a little bigger, and the heads are a little wider and more orangey, maybe, but they're really hard to tell apart. Here's the way you tell them apart, and it's like this is, for hurt people that are seriously wanting to know. Most of us would just say, yeah, cool skink, and move on. If you count the scales in front of the eye on that guy, you find one, two, three, four, five of those anterior labial scales, and that tells you it's a broadheaded. The the five lined, this is an adult female, so the lines are not as bright, but the females keep those lines. They don't really totally lose them. And if you could count the anterior labial scales, there'd be four. So it becomes very tricky to know which one is which. Um, but they're cool lizards to see regardless of which one it is. This is they are here. You certainly can see them at Fort Worth Nature Center. I'm not sure where else. We've never seen them at Sheri Capehart. I don't know if there's like if the bottoms, at like River Legacy, you might. I'm not sure, but I know they're at Fort Worth and further eastward. They're really common in the Big Thicket. Okay, another group of lizards that I love. This is a childhood memory because when I was a kid, they were in our yards, and you could like catch them as a kid and keep them for a little bit and turn them loose or whatever. These are only on the ground. They don't climb trees. They are super fast. Whiptails and race runners. This is a spotted whiptail photographed at the Fort Worth Nature Center. It's really wonderful to just watch them forage. If you watch one, they 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 move in jerky, nervous movements. It looks like they've got so much energy. It looks like they're on speed, right? They're just like they can barely hold it back, and so they're foraging around. If you watch them, they'll like poke around and find a little insect and eat it, and you can really have a good time watching them for a bit. But if you spook them, they just run off really quick. They're very, very fast. Here's a young one that I found at the LBJ National Grasslands. You don't ordinarily see that greenish tail, but I think that's a young whiptail thing to see. And this is a photo from Megan of a prairie race runner, which is a subspecies of the six-lined race runner. You may know these animals as six-lined race runners, but the prairie race runner is a subspecies of it. And they have that green wash. You see that lizard has that beautiful kind of lime green wash over the front part of its body. The difference, at least in habitat, is that these are more likely to be seen in, kind of mixed woodland, open area kind of stuff, whereas spotted whiptails often are seen in really open areas. So there's some habitat differences. Um, anyway, and the other thing about this lizard is you can see on the tail about a third of the way back or so, the texture and color changes, and that's because that tail has been regrown. You can see a little bit different texture, a little bit different pattern. And we'll talk about regrown tails in a bit, but that evidently lost its tail and regrew it. Another group is the collared lizards. This animal I photographed in Palo Duro. They're common there. They're common in a number of places west of here, especially if it's habitat with boulders. They love to get up on boulders and bask and claim that territory and all of that. It's a pretty big lizard. They're really fast. They can run on their hind legs, almost look like a little tyrannosaur. And they're very capable predators. So they eat insects, but they'll eat small lizards. They would eat a small mouse if it was pretty little. They basically will predators about anything small enough for this little tyrannosaur to catch. Very neat lizards. Uh, I've got on the slide uncertain status in Tarrant County because we used to see them occasionally in the western Tarrant County. I can remember seeing them out off Highway 377, kind of near Benbrook. Uh, and I'm pretty sure they are gone from Tarrant County. I'd be shocked if we found one in Tarrant County. I don't even know if you can still find them in Parker. So I think they're probably further westward. Okay, here's a western slender glass lizard. There's a couple of species of glass lizards in the US. This is the one we would have here. I have not been fortunate enough to find one. They're pretty uncommon. Either that or I really suck at finding them, which is also possible. So I borrowed this photo from somebody on Flickr. You can tell from this lizard, well, first of all, you can tell there's no legs. You can also tell that there's, starting after the head and down to the tail, there's a kind of a fold in the body. Do you see that kind of near the belly? There's a fold, and then the tail begins about halfway down or so. It has a really long tail, like a bunch of this lizard is tail. So the other thing that identifies it as a lizard is you can kind of tell that those are eyelids, right? Um, that lizard could certainly blink at you, and when it went to sleep, it would close its eyes. It has eyelids. It also has an ear opening just beyond the jaw, and so those things mark it as being a lizard. The other thing that's a little harder to tell is that the lower jaw would be fused. So this is a lizard that could chew up and would try to tear apart like insects that it eats. It basically, these can't have the big gape of a snake eating a big prey item. The jaws are fused, and so it sort of chomps and chews and eats insects. So that's the deal with glass lizards. They are really wonderful animals. I would love to find one. I hear that there's a sweet spot on Padre Island. So anybody want to go to Padre? Uh, let's go. Raise your hand if you want to go to. Anyway, those are glass lizards. They're very neat. Yeah, Erica's raising her hand, right? Yeah, tarantulas too, right? Yeah. Okay, here is an earless lizard. I photographed this at Pedernales Falls State Park because they used to be, gosh, I would go to the creek in Tarrant County as a kid, and these guys would run over the limestone and stop and raise and wave their tail. The tails have white and black bars underneath it, so it would wave the tail like a zebra, and then get away further. They're really fast, but otherwise they're really camouflaged. You can tell it blends in great with the limestone. Um, and something used to be common in limestone creeks in Tarrant County. They're gone. I understand from Mark Pyle that they're still, and this has been a few years ago, but he said they were still down around Granbury. So, maybe you could go down there and see one on the Paluxy or whatever, but not in Tarrant County anymore. These lizards dig into sand a lot, and so they have two modifications for that. One is the lower jaw is inset. They have a kind of an overbite. The lower jaw is inset under the upper jaw so that if it's sort of diving into the sand, it doesn't force sand into its mouth. And then the other thing is it has the equipment to be able to hear. I don't know how well, but it can hear, but it has no external ear. And so thus the name earless lizards. Um, and that's one of our only lizards the only one I can think of right now that has no ear opening like that. So very cool lizards. You can go down in the hill country and find them. You can go out west and see them. There's a subspecies of this one in the Big Bend area that is gorgeous. They're neat lizards. So this is one of that family that I said was Phrynosomatidee. That includes the spiny lizards and everything. So this is like a distant relative of spiny lizards. Speaking of spiny lizards, here's a Texas spiny. This one photographed at Sheri Capehart. They are common. It's like the common lizard at Sheri Capehart. We do have little brown skinks at Sheri Capehart Nature Preserve as well. But these guys are pretty common. They like to perch on tree trunks and spot insects, and they'll run down, grab the insect, and run back up the tree. If any of you have tried to catch them, you know that they're just wonderful climbers. And what'll happen is they'll let you get close to a certain point, but when you get too close, they scoot around to the other side of the tree trunk. Um, when I was a kid, and I wouldn't do this anymore. It's like there's no reason to stress the lizard, and there's a chance of accidentally breaking the tail. So I wouldn't do this anymore. But when I was a kid, I'd get somebody to spot me. There are two of us, and we would catch spiny lizards. One would be a little further back so they could see where on the trunk it was and would show me about what level on the trunk. I would be on the blind side, and I would reach around quickly and be able to catch the lizard before it got away. Um, one little bit of trivia on these guys is that this is a female. It's actually a pretty chunky female, and she might have been gravid. But females have those black wavy crossbars, and males see the black crossbars? Now let's have a look at a male, and he doesn't really have much. He looks more striped. That's what males are more likely to look like. So that's a way of telling males from females in Texas spiny lizards. Also, it has a regenerated tail. You can see where the texture and color completely changes back there. So this guy he was really giving me the eye, like one more step and I'm out of here. And let's talk about horned lizards for a second. We used to have Texas horned lizards, but you have to be, nearly as old as me to remember it. This one I photographed out kind of northeast, I think, or north of Abilene. So if you get that far out there and you're out on dirt roads and whatever, you keep an eye out, you might see one. They're protected. Please don't catch one. And please don't, I don't think I doubt anybody in this group would want to keep one as a pet. They're absolutely horrendous pets. If you keep one as a pet, you might as well just kill it. Because they have particular habitat and feeding needs. They eat, as most of you know, they eat harvester ants. They're big ant eaters. The literature says that they eat some degree of like crickets and other small insects. I've not seen it. What I've seen is that specialized behavior where they station themselves by a harvester ant trail and lap up the ants as they come along. Um, they are able to process those ants, even though with all that formic acid, it'd be kind of hard on the tummy, but they're very well adapted to eat those puppies. Anyway, uh, I'd like to go into more about horned lizards. I have a whole talk about horned lizards, but we can't do that now. They disappeared from around here in the 70s, basically. And they're gone from this area. But as I said, you can go out west and see them. Um, and I'd love to talk to you about the repopulation efforts. I wrote about that for Green Source, Texas, a couple of years ago, and you can look up that article. But Fort Worth Zoo and San Antonio Zoo, and at least one other zoo, but those are the two I know about more, are captive breeding and releasing those guys. It's a really a delicate thing. Like, in other words, we shouldn't try that ourselves. They need to really know what they're doing, particularly as it pertains to the release sites. The release sites have to be just right. Habitat has to be just right. The communities of plants and animals have to be just right. It's not like you can just go out and let one go. But at any rate, they're releasing baby horned lizards and finding them grown up and even finding them reproducing. So some of those efforts are working, which makes you think, maybe we can bring them back some. But as long as the habitat is not right, and around here, fire ants are part of the problem. Disappearance of bunchgrass prairie is part of the problem. As long as the habitat isn't right, any effort to turn them loose would be doomed to fail. But anyway, uh, let's talk about horned lizards versus spiny lizards, because sometimes somebody will say, "Well, I saw a horny toad the other day, here in Tarrant County." And that's because spiny lizards are so spiky, sometimes people confuse the two. So horned lizards have, Texas horned lizards, our particular species, have two horns at the back of the head that are very prominent. Spiny lizards don't have those at all. It's got to have those two really prominent horns. It has to be sort of flattened with a broad body. They're not built for climbing trees. They're built for being on the ground. They have a short tail, and they don't climb. Whereas the Texas spiny lizards have a rounded body that's not flattened. They have a long tail, unless it's been broken off, and they're like incredible climbers. They spend most of the time in trees. So those are the differences. Okay, I said I'd talk about tail loss. Tail autotomy would be the word for that. Many, but not all of them, are structured so that they can break off their tail. Horned lizards that we were just talking about, that's one species that is not designed to lose their tail. But spiny lizards and animals and most of the others are structured so that they can break off the tail if grabbed, to avoid predation. So they developed that, through evolution to avoid predators like birds and other small predators. It also helps them get away from little boys and little girls who are trying to catch them, or even big boys and girls, I guess. Um, but birds and other animals can be predators of lizards, and or even some other snakes. I mean, you got coach whips that eat lizards a lot, but if they grab the tail, it'll break off, and the lizard lives to hunt another day, right? And some species of lizards have fracture planes through the middle of the vertebra and muscle. So muscle contraction can break it and facilitate dropping the tail. The first one I think about is some of the geckos, but at any rate, some of them, they can almost voluntarily uh, lose the tail if they think they have to because of a predator. There's very little bleeding. It heals quickly. That part's not a problem. The tail will regenerate, but as you've seen in those photos, the tail's different. It's not the same. It has a cartilage center rather than vertebrae, and there's some research, and I know, boy, talk about nerdism, right? There's at least one study I can remember where lizards with that had lost tails had lower standing in the social hierarchy. It's like, I just picture middle school kids, right? But at any rate, it's like they weren't as able to claim territory. They weren't as effective in interacting with other lizards. I think it got better when they regrew their tail. But there is a cost to losing a tail socially, as well, and probably with balance and speed. Um, but of course, it's better than getting killed. Um, I think it's the some of the skinks will return and consume. I mean, it's like I put a lot of time and attention in building that tail, and I'm not just throwing it away. So if they get attacked and lose the tail, if the bird or whatever doesn't consume it, the lizard may come back and eat it because those are that energy that was spent growing that tail. They could get some of that back by eating the tail. Anyway, now have you had dinner? Would you like a tail tonight? Let's talk about snakes. In North Texas, there's these are the families. Again, don't really worry too much about the family names unless you really want to. I have also divided them out in a way. So it used to be that most of our harmless snakes were all under Colubridae. They were all called colubrids. It was a great big family with a ton of different snakes, rat snakes, king snakes, but it also included garter snakes and everything else. And that's some of those have been split off. So let's start at the top. The top family includes what used to be called blind snakes. The official common name is now thread snakes. We'll look at them in a second. Um, and then there's the colubrids, the stuff like rat snakes, king snakes, racers and coach whips, that sort of thing. And then there's a family called Natricidae. Used to be, they're basically what we call natricines, right? Garter snakes, water snakes. They're harmless live-bearing snakes. So what they have in common is that they have their babies in clear membranes rather than laying eggs. So garter snakes, water snakes, and some of the smaller other snakes like DK snakes and all are in that family. The other families, Dipsadidae. See, I'm not even used to it. I can't tell you. Those are rear fang snakes like hognose snakes and ringneck snakes. They were kind of split off from that main family into their own family because they are rear fanged. And if you want to have a look on my blog, I've posted an article about Duvernoy's glands and toxic secretions of things like hognose snakes. So if you want more details about that, there's an article out there you could go download or go have a look at and read. Basically, the deal is that hognose snakes, while they should be considered harmless. But if you let if you have a Western hognose snake and you feed it and it's like yum and grabs your finger, and if you let it chew on you, especially, you may have some symptoms. And it turns out sometimes those symptoms are kind of severe. Like some people include wound up with some low platelet counts in their blood, some almost beginning to mimic some of the things that happen in venomous snake bite. Um, but it resolves. There's no antivenom. You don't need to go get antivenom. But if you have a hognose snake, don't let it chew on you. If you find a hognose snake out in the field, it's not going to bite you, so don't worry. Um, and the stuff like ringneck snakes are too small really to bite you. So none of those snakes in that family are anything you need to worry about, but they are rear-fanged and have some mild toxins. And then the other two families are Crotalidea that have the stuff like copperheads, cottonmouths, rattlesnakes, and then the Elapidae, which is the coral snake. So those are the groups of snakes. So let's go through a few of them. I apologize for this photo. It used to be a good photo, and then I looked at it closer, and it's like, nah, the focus is kind of crappy. But it's sort of a pinkish. When you find a blind snake out cruising around, it may look pinkish or it may look silvery, and it's about the size of an earthworm. And they specialize in getting into termite and ant colonies. They can actually secrete something that repels the ants. they're basically unlikely to be attacked, and they just cruise through there and eat ant eggs and pupae like it's just picnic time. So go for it, dudes. Unfortunately, as far as I know, they cannot eat fire ant eggs and pupae. So darn it, that would be nice, right? If they could be a good predator for those. There is a relationship that we can't go into. We haven't got time to go into very much, but there's a relationship between these guys and screech owls that some of you may know about, where the owls will pick up the snake and put it in the nest, and the snake consumes some of the really tiny arthropods, the little inverts that could bug the owlets, right? The fledges. Um, so it's a benefit to the owls that way. And I guess it's of some benefit to the blind snake because, it gets to eat all the stuff that you find in owl nests, and then falls to the ground later, I guess. So that part's not so cool, right? If I was a blind snake and say, well, wait a minute, I think I'll just stick with the ant colony. I don't think I want to fall out of that oak tree. But at any rate, it's a pretty cool relationship between those two animals. Um, all right, now some colubrids. Everybody knows this. Most of you know this snake, right? So this is what used to be called the Texas rat snake. It is now called the Western rat snake. Basically, these are big guys, and they range from nearly black or gray, like the one on the left, to more yellowish on the right. They have a really complicated pattern, right? They have these blotches that are sort of not really square. They're kind of a complicated shape. They have these little between scale white colors. You see that on the one on the right? There's some on the left as well. So in the blotches, there's these little patches of white. And then between the blotches, there's yellow and little bits of like orange or red. It's really a cool, very complicated pattern. I love them. Um, these are great climbers. And what happens is that because they can cruise through the tree canopy, people don't know that they're there. Like they can be in a suburban area and they'll cruise through parks and tree canopies. And then somebody finds one on the ground and it's like, whoa, what is this 6 foot snake? Most of them are more like, 3 or 4 feet, but they can get pretty big. Um, and they eat rats and mice. They will also eat fledgling birds. Sorry about that, birders, but that's just how they make a living. Um, but they eat lots of rats and mice, so they're really valuable in that way. They're really completely inoffensive unless you pick them up. If any of you have picked up a Western rat snake, you probably know, right? So they'll gape at you, and if you give them a target, they'll bite you, and it's harmless. They'll leave little scratches, no big deal. But if you leave them alone, they're completely harmless. Here's a nearly black one from out near Caddo Lake. So further east and north you get, the more it looks like a black rat snake. Those are just gorgeous. So anyway, that's a really common harmless snake. They're great constrictors, great tree climbers. Um, and that's it for Texas rat. Oh, I do want to show you the juvenile. Because people will see babies and they're not sure it's the same snake. Look at the head pattern. So back here you had a plain head pattern. Even on these others, you have a plain gray, kind of slate gray head pattern on the top. But the babies have a band across the snout and this kind of squiggly stuff on the back of the head. So the head pattern's different. And it does make them look a little bit like a Great Plains rat snake, which we'll look at in a minute. Um, but at any rate, that's just normal juvenile coloration for a Texas rat snake, and it will darken up as it ages. Here is a Great Plains rat snake. These, oh gosh, these are gorgeous snakes. They are really like our corn snake, right? So some of you know about corn snakes. Um, this is, well, they now consider them Pantherophis emerii, but they used to be Pantherophis guttatus emerii. In other words, a subspecies of the same species as the corn snake. That's changed a little bit, but basically it's like a Western version of a corn snake. Often they're really gentle and friendly. uh, friendly might not be the right word, but they often don't bite. I have certainly picked them up off the road at night and had them bite the crud out of me, but very often they don't. They're often really sweet. These have this spear point design on the front of the head. You can see, not on the front, on the top of the head, that pattern comes together in a point, pointing forward. And then there's a band across the eyes and snout. It reminds you a little bit of that Texas rat snake, right? But in an adult, if it has this, it's a Great Plains rat snake. The other thing that, if you're used to looking at them, you'll notice is that Great Plains rat snakes have shorter, larger numbers of blotches, and they're shorter. You see, this animal has kind of oblong blotches down its back. They're not shaped like that Texas rat snake. Anyway, that's the Great Plains rat snake. They're not likely to be seen in the city. It's not like you're gonna find them in your backyard or anything, but out particularly west of here and into Parker County, you start to see them. Here's a bull snake. I love these snakes. They're wonderful, big old snakes. They get um, 6+ feet if they live that long. Very often you're only going to see one that's more like 4 or 5, but they're big, hefty, really strong snakes, and they have a big bluffing response. They'll hiss and rattle their tail and look like a rattlesnake, which gets them killed a lot. But they're harmless, and they're ground dwelling. They actually like to eat gophers, and they'll get into rodent burrows quite a bit. Anyway, that's the bull snake. Okay, here's an eastern yellow-bellied racer. Um, so you look at the adult with that yellow belly and the kind of, slightly bluish, slightly brown. They vary a lot. Sometimes they're a little bit olive color. Sometimes they're sort of gray. Sometimes a bit blue. But the juveniles, if you see in the inset there, the juveniles look completely different. So they're spotted and blotched and beautiful, but as they get a little older, those fade and it becomes adult colored. So if you see one with that pattern of spots, it's a juvenile racer. They're really fast. People think they can. It seems like the snake can outrun them. What I think the truth is that we on an open path, we could outrun the snake, but the snakes weave through rocks and sticks and cacti so fast that you just can't keep up with them. They're really, really fast, but they're gorgeous snakes. I love them. Okay, a relative of as a matter of fact, up until recently, they had put them both together in the genus Coluber, and that's now changed back. It's like these naming changes sometimes get weird. Used to be, this was a Masticophis. That was the genus. Masticophis flagellum was a coach whip. Um, Coluber constrictor, Coluber constrictor was the racer, and then they decided, well, these guys are all the same, so Coluber flagellum, right? Now they've changed that back. So those of you that keep up with scientific names, or you see it on INAT or something like this, you should be seeing Masticophis again. But they're related. These are slender, long. They could get to, again, not usually, but they can get to 6+ feet long, and they're just super fast. Now, here's the story that the old folks would tell. I don't know who else would tell, but you hear this folk tale that coach whips will whip you. Um, and a little bit of that might be the pattern on the tail. If you look at the tail of this guy, the inner edge of the tail, each scale is white, and then it darkens toward the leading edge of the scale, toward the back. And what that means is that it makes it look like a braided whip, doesn't it? If you look at that tail, it sort of looks like it's braided. So it looks like a whip, And the only other thing I can think of is if you pick one up, they'll thrash around a lot. And it might feel like you're getting whipped because it thrashes around a lot. I'm not sure how that story gets started. They won't actually like purposely whip you. If you pick them up, they'll they'll bite you, which is just little scratches, no big deal. Um, and they'll thrash, and then you set them down where they're supposed to be, and they'll crawl off and leave you alone. Um, so this is one from LBJ Grasslands. The further east you go, the darker the forward part of the body is. So by the time you get east of Dallas, it's the eastern coach whip, and they can be like black for the first third to half of the body, and then it fades into brown toward the tail. They're just gorgeous snakes, but they're very closely related, just two different subspecies. Um, all right, here are king snakes. Now I'm gonna whine about names a little bit for a minute. I'm gonna whine a little bit about scientific names because this so the snake you see there, you see the top on the left and a look at the belly scales on the right. That looks partly like a speckled king snake. Okay, all right, it has those yellow speckles down the back and a little bit like a desert king snake, which is what it looks like by the time you get to West Texas, where in patches down the back, there's no speckles. So it looks like black blotches down the back. This one is intermediate. You can kind of see where it's starting to get black blotches, but it also kind of just looks speckled. This properly ought to be considered, I think, um, Lampropeltis getula, uh, in the case of the speckled king snake, Lampropeltis getula holbrooki, and in the case of the desert king snake, Lampropeltis getula splendida. Um, there's been a lot of work in DNA studies and looking at how different snakes are related to each other, looking at DNA, and most of that research is wonderful, and it's great that we have it. And in some cases, it's reclassified snakes, and it should be that way, right? Because they literally learn more about it. Some people, uh, eh, let's just say, I don't want to be tacky or anything. Let's just say it's possible for someone who really wants to get the study done to inadequately sample. To do it properly, you need to look at the DNA from specimens from kind of all over the range. If you wanted to say, look, this one is Lampropeltis splendida and this one is Lampropeltis holbrooki, you need to sample all through that range and see if they're truly different species. It ought to be a sharp demarcation, right? The DNA ought to change along a line, and because hybrids, can happen, but when it's just a different subspecies, we call it intergradation, right? Those of you that follow me on this, I know some of you are like, just move on. But intergrades is when it's all the same species and it's different subspecies. They're really closely related snakes. And those the DNA would gradually shift over the area where they shift, where the pattern changes, right? As opposed to a hard line. Well, these snakes have a big old line of what used to be called intergradation, meaning the speckled starts being kind of like a desert king snake, kind of in our area, and it's not completely desert king snake, and you get all the way out to West Texas. There's a big old area that is sort of blended. That sounds like subspecies. Um, but if you don't adequately sample enough specimens and a couple of other technical things that you don't do a good job of in a DNA study, you may decide, well, they're different when maybe they're not. So, okay, enough whining. That's for those of you who are really interested in that stuff. It's probably more than some of you wanted to know. All right, here's a prairie king snake. This is also a king snake, same genus. These are spotted. These are lovely snakes. This is Megan's photo, which was from our book, Mindfulness in Texas Nature. Um, because there's a little bit of natural history through there as well. This is from LBJ Grasslands. We found this snake, and she was just a delightful animal, and put up with taking some photos, and then crawled away, and we watched her disappear. She was just lovely. So I love prairie king snakes. Um, all right, this one is harder to love, right? Everybody recognizes diamondback water snakes probably. This is a mama and her babies. Um, and the story behind this is that Carl Franklin and I collected this girl, or picked her up, and noticed that she seemed to be gravid. And I decided to hang on to her for just a little bit so she could have the babies and I could take them all out and release them so that babies all succeeded, right? I'm just kind of tipping the scales, interfering with nature a little bit, but that's what I did. So she had these babies while I had her for a few days. And then I took them all out and turned them loose. You can see the babies look like the adult. There's very little difference in the pattern, and it has a kind of a black chain-like pattern down a sort of an olive, kind of brownish, kind of greenish body. These are big water snakes. They like to eat fish. They're absolutely fine unless you pick one up. If you pick one up, they're big biters. They really will defensively bite. But we need to get over the idea of talking about some species being mean or not based on some of us liking to go out and pick up snakes. These, it's this water snake is certainly not mean, but she knows how to defend herself, and she'll do it. And it leaves some scratches. It's not a big deal. But if I didn't want to get bitten, I just need to leave her alone. She would never ever hurt me unless I pick her up, and that's the same for the rest of us. Here's our other water snake. This is the what used to be called the blotched water snake, because the adults even still had a little bit of a pattern of blotches down the back. It's now called the plain-bellied water snake. These are basically chocolate brown. Some of them get kind of plain brown on the top and kind of yellow on the belly. They're also not big fans of being picked up. So if you pick one up, just prepare to get some scratches, or better off, leave them alone. Um, they're both pretty common snakes. Diamondback and blotched water or plain belly water snakes are common even in urban areas, in like parks and streams and stuff. It's not hard to find them. People often confuse them with cottonmouths. Now you notice that this snake has its head flattened a little bit. They can flatten them even more, and that's where the rule about triangular head that goes away, because this snake has a kind of a triangular shaped head, and it's certainly not venomous. So, if somebody tries to tell you, well, if it's got that triangle head, it's got to be poisonous. It's simply not that. That's not an accurate rule. Um, Here's a baby. The babies are more brightly patterned. This photo doesn't show it up very much, but the bars between the dark bars on the side of the animal, the babies tend to be kind of pink. It's really kind of cool. They darken up as they get older, of course, and become kind of plain chocolate brown. Um, the other way that people talk about identifying these snakes, that I think a lot of you know this. I'm just reviewing stuff you already know. One of them is those lip bars. You see that even on the diamondback water snake, you can make out some kind of dark edges, black bars on the edges of the lip scales. On the plain belly, it's easier to see dark bars along the lip scales. Cottonmouths don't have those. So if you see an animal with these black bar or dark bars on the lips, it's likely to be a water snake. Same with the big round eyes set higher on the head. That helps you see that it's a water snake. When we look at a cottonmouth in a minute, you'll see that the eyes are different, the lips are different. So those are some useful ways of telling them. Okay, now we're still in that family of nature scene snakes. So this is a related but different snake, the DK's brown snake. This is a fairly pale snake from the big thicket area. The ones usually what you find are more brown, but this really shows off that light line down the back. They'll all have at least a little bit of a light line down the back with those little dark spots along the edges. And then at the back of the head, you see Behind the head it's a pale color and then dark blotches. That's also very typical. Those tell you that's a DK's brown snake. Um, they're small. I don't know if you can tell from the photo. They're less than a foot long. They eat snails and slugs and soft-bodied insects. They're completely inoffensive. Really very nice little snakes. Um, this is a not very good photo of a Texas garter snake. And I'm going to talk about those. I'm not going to spend much time right now, uh, but next meeting when we talk about conservation, I want to talk about the Texas garter snake a little bit. Um, Texas garter snakes, I, in my lifetime, they've never been common. So when I was in the 60s, when I was a kid running around catching a lot of snakes, I only found a handful of these. They were never common. Um, but you'd find a sweet spot where they might show up here and there, and there'd be other places you wouldn't find them at all here in the Metroplex, and that seems to be the case everywhere. They range down to Austin and up to Oklahoma or close to Oklahoma. They have a broad orange stripe, and um, anyway, the deal is Parks and Wildlife considers them critically imperiled, although they get no protection whatsoever, which is kind of sad. And we'll go into that more in the next uh, session. But the quick answer about that is that the Texas garter snake is a subspecies of the common garter snake. Now, you know that a lot of biologists consider that, you don't need to worry about anything below species level, right? We think about species, subspecies are not even a thing for some biologists, right? They just don't even recognize them particularly. So if it's a subspecies um, of a snake that's not otherwise critically imperiled, it's not going to get any protection. So that's the reason it doesn't get protected. Here is a snake that might get confused with it, and that's the Western ribbon snake. So here you see a snake that's got a, a broad lateral stripe. The side stripe is messier, right? It's not real clean. It's broader. And there's a little bit of a checkerboard pattern down the back of that snake. And it has dark lip bars. Whereas the ribbon snake doesn't have any dark lip bars and it doesn't have any checkerboard. And that lateral stripe is real clean and it's set a little higher on the snake. So that's one way to tell. But people see them sometimes after I talk about Texas garter snakes, and they'll say, well, I saw a striped snake like that. But usually they're seeing a ribbon snake. Okay, the rough earth snake, another nature scene. These are little, about worm-sized snakes, right? A lot of you have seen them. You see them in gardens. They're completely inoffensive. One way to tell if it's a rough earth snake is if that head is narrow and pointed like that, it's no wider than the neck. That's a pretty good clue that it's a rough earth snake. It's rough because the scales are keeled. And if you look at the photo, you can kind of make out that there's a raised area along each scale. That makes it keeled. And so it's not smooth, it's rough. Not that rough, but it's a little bit rough. These eat earthworms and a few small soft-bodied insects, that kind of stuff. And now we're into that other new family of rear-fanged snakes. This is the eastern hog-nosed snake. Um, and it is just a lovely snake. Well, people regard them as cute, or somehow some of us are kind of just magically attracted to hognose snakes. They think they're really, really cool. And I'm one of those people. I really like them. This is kind of what they look like in the eastern part of their range, the eastern hognose snake. Um, and what they do, the thing they're known for is their defensive behavior. So if you find a hognose snake like this, one of the first things it's likely to do is to spread out the neck, like you see in that top photograph. It looks like a cobra a little bit. They have those two black patches that look like eye spots, and it makes them very dramatic. And they will turn that neck toward you, and they'll hiss, and they'll jerk around and it looks like it's striking. But if you're not all excited and scared, if you notice what's really happening, the snake is jerking around and not really trying to bite you. It's not striking. It is jerking toward you and hissing and trying to just be as threatening looking as it can possibly be, so you'll leave it alone. And if that doesn't work, then it will roll over and sort of play dead. The photo on the bottom is a hognose that I saw in the big thicket. Uh, was in the midst of taking photos of the snake, and it's like it flipped over on its back, and it's just, that's it. That's the way it's going to stay. If you turn it back on its stomach, it'll flip back on its back. And it sits there with its mouth open and its tongue hanging out, and it just looks for all the world like a just nasty dead snake. And I suppose the adaptive advantage is that a predator, because they didn't evolutionarily develop this behavior just for us. They haven't been seeing human beings for that long. But for other predators, presumably if it looks dead, it's nasty and they're not going to eat it. They might leave it alone and leave, and the snake will then begin to turn over. It'll kind of look up, see if the coast is clear, and if it's everything is okay, they'll turn over and crawl away. Um, so now these guys are not going to be found in the pet trade, and they're hard to keep because they are dedicated toad and frog eaters. Pretty much you have to go catch toads if you're going to keep an eastern hognose snake. Um, People have tried to get them use scent from toads to get them eating mice. And when they've done that, they often find the snake doesn't do very well. It may be that there's a dietary thing that they need from toads. I don't know. Right tonight, we're just talking about them as wildlife. So that part doesn't matter. But you're not going to see them as pets. These, on the other hand, you will see as pets. This is the western hognose snake. The little guy on the left, you see the kind of a shorter, little stubbier face. They all kind of have those spots, a sandy color like that. That's pretty typical for western hognose snakes. Um, they are, basically found, west of here into, well, they're that and the eastern hognose overlap a little. There are places where you could find either one. But the further west you get, the more it's just the western hognose snake. Their belly scales, the pattern is really pretty. You can see on the right that sometimes it's sort of black and orange, or in this case, black and yellow. They're really pretty belly scales. They will do the same bluffing routine as you saw with the eastern. They'll try and be a cobra and hiss and carry on and then turn over. But when kept as pets, they don't do that anymore. They kind of know that you're not a threat and they won't do that anymore. These are the ones where in that article I wrote about Duvernois glands, where there's some reports of bites from these guys giving people some trouble, some pain and swelling, bleeding. It resolves later, but uh, it can be kind of a problem. Okay, let's talk about venomous snakes. So this is the western diamondback rattlesnake. Um, this is our biggest venomous snake, and along with the bull snake, I guess, kind of almost tied for our biggest snake. These usually, though, when you find these, they're 3 or 4 feet long. The rattlesnake roundups have kind of trimmed down the population uh, of old ones where you don't tend to see the really big ones. At least that may be the reason you don't see very many very big ones. Um, but at any rate, this is a snake that is uh, our most dangerous venomous snake because some of them they can get very defensive and they have fairly potent venom and a pretty big dose. So if you get a full bite from a western diamondback rattlesnake, you have got a very serious bite going on. However, I was I was teaching Megan to use a snake hook and move these snakes like off the road out in West Texas, or basically a little bit of moving them around safely. And she's very good at it. But what she remarked was like, when are we going to find one that does what they're supposed to do? Because all these Western Diamondbacks that we would find would just kind of sit there, and then we'd like hook them off the road, and it's like, oh, okay, fine, whatever. And we'd get off the road like without giving us any trouble. Um, Now, those of you who were here in that first session we did, I talked about one that it was heated up on the road, and it was scared and excited, and it nearly bit me. If you remember that story, I won't recount it here, but basically what I'm saying is it's possible, particularly under the right circumstances, and particularly if you neglect the cues, to find one that's going to get really unhappy with you and strike and seem very aggressive. Um, but a lot of the time they don't do very much. And again, I've told you this in earlier sessions. I don't ever want to make it sound like our pit vipers are no big deal, because they are a big deal. So when I talk about them being kind of laid back or whatever, nobody should get the idea that, oh, so I can just like walk up to one and not even worry about it, because they are truly dangerous snakes. But that doesn't mean that they always stand up and rattle and strike and do the big thing that you've seen them do. But let's talk about the rattle for a second. Um, Babies are born with a button. Um, and if you can see the right side diagram, this is from that book that I did called The Wild Lives of Reptiles and Amphibians. And Johnson did some good diagrams for that. There's a cutaway section of rattle, and at the end of that is a button. That's what the babies are born with. And then each time they shed their skin, they get a new segment on the rattle. So those are dry interlocking segments that are loose enough that if you shake them, they rattle. And they have specialized shaker muscles in the tail that can move at more than 60 cycles per second. Well, if you think about it, 60 cycles per second, that's like AC current, isn't it? That's like the frequency where the fluorescent bulb or the light bulb is going to fuse and look like continuous light, even though it's flickering back and forth. It's super, super fast, isn't it? Uh, and these guys can do that for quite a while. That it turns out that they have specialized muscles and a really good blood supply. Because think about it, if you tried to do that, how quick would your muscles, seize up and cramp up where you couldn't do it anymore? These snakes can do it for quite a long time. Anyway, so that's the rattle thing. And here's how it sounds. You will hear Clint make some remark. It's like, he needed to stay quiet, but he didn't. Anyway, this snake is a captive snake. Clint's captive. It is not super wound up, and so the rattle is not quite as rapid as you might hear, but this is what it sounds like. And he's kind of in a defensive coil. What's uh, what's pretty rough is if you're out in West Texas and you hear that. Well, let's see. Here it is. Chick, 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 chick. Right? There's a rattlesnake nearby, and if you can't spot where it is, oh my, you better freeze and find the snake so you don't step on it. So anyway, that's the Western Diamondback's rattle. This is the canebrake rattlesnake, or now it's called the timber rattlesnake, and that's because the southern variety used to be thought of as a slightly different animal, the canebrake. But up in the Northeast, there are timber rattlesnakes, and ours are now considered just to be timber rattlesnakes. These are big snakes. They are often, again, kind of laid back. They are really well camouflaged. When you walk by one out there, you might walk by one and not even know that it's there because they can be very well camouflaged, and they kind of know that works for them, right? Plus, you remember when I said what I said in that first session that we had was that snakes reaction when when a predator or a potential enemy comes up, that tends to be to either freeze or try to get away. And then if that doesn't work, they often will bluff or warn. And if that doesn't work, they'll bite. So these guys really rely on freezing quite a bit. But a bite would be a very bad thing. These are big snakes. These have some populations of them have a neurotoxic component. We're going to talk about venoms in a minute. And a lot of the rattlesnakes, copperheads, cottonmouths, people talk about the venom being hemotoxic, meaning blood and tissue destroying. But neurotoxic is something that attacks the nervous system. And these guys can have some of both. So it's a bad bite if you were to be bitten by one. Let's see. This is a massive saga. I have these. I'm sorry. I have to tell you about these childhood memories of the Western Massasauga because it used to be out west of Fort Worth toward Benbrook. You could find these things at sunset, like all over the place. You'd find one every half a mile or so. And I was so young that my parents would have to drive, and I'd get out with a snake hook and move it off the road so it wouldn't get run over. They're small. They can get up to close to 3 feet, but usually, yeah, a foot and a half, couple feet long might be what you would see. They have this really pretty facial pattern. And the blotches down the back, it's really very common for those blotches to be like you see on this photo. They're sort of heart-shaped, right? So if you remember heart-shaped, and you remember a pretty face and head pattern on a little rattlesnake, that's the Western Massasauga. They have not completely disappeared, but mostly disappeared from out just west of Fort Worth. You can't go out there and expect to see a Massasauga anymore, and that's a shame. And what they would do is usually sit still, and then if I touch them, they usually burst into motion and try and get the heck out of the way. And occasionally they would jab at you. So again, it's not a snake to trifle with. Even at 13, I would not mess with these snakes as a show off or just do stupid stuff. I'm out there with the right equipment, having seen how to do it, know how to do it, and move them off the road from a safe distance. And if you do that, from a safe distance, you can see one of these things and not being in danger. Here's an even smaller one. This is the Western pygmy rattlesnake. These are rare in our area, or they're very uncommon at any rate. I have seen a couple at LBJ Grasslands, that area, but very infrequently. They like woodlands. They're fond of pine groves or pine forests. They like sandy, well-drained soil, and they like areas where they can kind of halfway hide under mottled sunshine. You get a thicket of greenbrier or that kind of thing is great for them because they can be partly hidden, but still get, bask in the sunshine a little bit. They're venomous enough to send you to the hospital, but you're very unlikely to die. And that doesn't mean, of course, that you should blow it off. If you were to be bitten by one of these, you need to go to the hospital and be treated, partly because even a venomous snake bite that's not going to kill you is going to be extremely uncomfortable and might leave you with some loss of function in a finger or whatever. Look at the rattle on this guy. So if you look at the curled tail, the rattle's at the end. It's really tiny. If you're out in the field with one of these, obviously this is a close-up photograph. It's a very small snake. They're like, a foot and a half long, and the little tiny rattle, it barely buzzes, so you're not likely to hear it very much. Okay, let's talk about copperheads for a moment. This is an eastern copperhead, moving across a sandy road in what's called rectilinear motion. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Um, the thing about eastern copperheads and the ones like in East Dallas and eastward from there, they're going to look like this. They're going to have these little Hershey's Kisses shaped bands, or little kind of hourglass shaped bands across the back. Um, and that's typical of an eastern copperhead, whereas a broad-banded copperhead looks like this. So the bands are broader. They don't taper in the middle of the back. They're a little uneven, but they're going to be darker and really pretty and kind of broader. That's a broad-banded copperhead. So that uh, they shade into broad-banded copperheads in the Metroplex and west of the Metro. I mean, this guy came from LBJ grasslands, um, and that's by that point they look like that, and they're broad-banded copperheads. Okay, here's a cottonmouth, and you remember we looked at water snakes, and we said that the eyes were kind of set on the top of their head, kind of googly eyes. These guys have a very flat head. If you look at that animal's head, it's very flat. There's sort of a ridge at the side of the head, right? It's really a very chiseled, sculpted animal, the top of that head. And so the eyes are under a ridge. It makes it look mad, but that's purely anthropomorphism. That the animal is not mad, but it has that ridge over the eye, and the eye is on the side of the head and definitely not toward the top of the head. So that's one of the things we talked about being a way to tell water snakes from cottonmouths. The other thing is you notice there's a pattern on the lips, but there's no lip bars. So there's darker and lighter color, but there's no lip bars. There's a kind of a dark, almost band through the side of the face toward the back of the head, and then the lips are lighter colored, but no lip bars. So that's a cottonmouth. Um, I want to well, let's look at a juvenile first, and well, let's first look at this. So again, remembering the whole sequence of what they do, right? Freeze, run away, bluff, strike. This is one bluffing. So, and this is that cottonmouth thing that they're known for, right? And you notice that guy's fangs are folded against the roof of the mouth. That snake is not trying to bite. It's making no effort at all to try to bite. What it's doing is showing us the inside of its mouth to try to warn or bluff us away. And that is very common behavior. Cottonmouths, very often, if you get them cornered, they'll sit there and rattle a tail and gape their mouth open like, are you dumb? Do you not see this? You need to get away from me because like this is not cool. Um, and they very often don't actually try to bite you, and they certainly do not chase you. But they very often will just, and of course, again, you never challenge it. You never go up and say, oh, yeah, that's just a bluff and offer it your hand because, yeah, you might get bitten. But some people did a study some years ago looking at that, looking at the bad reputation that cottonmouths had. And they went out and found like hundreds of cottonmouths and tried one of several things. They either stepped just beside the snake in snake-proof boots. They lightly stepped on the snake, not enough to hurt it, but just enough to touch it with, again, snake-proof boots. Um, or they reached down with grabbers, tongs, with a shirt sleeve and gloves to mimic a human arm and reached down and picked up the cottonmouth. And guess what? Usually when you step beside or on it, they rattle the tail, they might musk, they might gape, they mostly try to get away. That's all they do. Uh, and of course, you never say never, right? Again, give them respect. Don't ever take chances. But that's the deal. And then when they picked him up with the tongs, if I'm remembering correctly, and don't quote me exactly, but I believe it was about 30%. It was like under half of them bit the tongs. Most of them just try to get away or do those other things. So I say that to try to dispel this awful idea that people have about cottonmouths being so aggressive and chasing you and just being horrible. When I have found in the field, and I've seen a lot of cottonmouths in the field, and it's usually like this. They try to get away, but if they can't, they'll bluff you like this. And usually, like most of them are not going to try to bite unless you really push the limits more than you should have. So if you step on one, like all bets are off, right? You remember the study, they won't all bite, but some of them will. So don't take any chances, but just know that they don't chase you. They're not really all that aggressive. Just treat them with respect and give them some distance. All right, here's what a baby looks like. This is a young northern cottonmouth. They have patterns that look kind of like copperheads, don't they? Um, so they have the face pattern. Again, they don't have lip bars like a water snake. And again, there's that flat head with the ridge. So it's definitely a cottonmouth that way. And that snake will grow up to darken and become very dark like the other one you just saw. But as babies, they're reddish, or very often they're reddish like that, and can be confused with copperheads. All right, now a different family entirely, the elapids, which in Texas, in the United States, it's just the coral snake that's the only representative. You know, in the old world, you have cobras. You have, well, I guess in North America and some of the coast, you have sea snakes, which are elapids. But on land, it's just the coral snakes in the United States. Now, the eastern coral snake, if you go to Florida, some of what I'll say about how toxic they are won't apply because they're more dangerous in Florida. Ours are not as dangerous, and we'll talk about that in a second. They so the coral snakes they're relatively small and slender. You notice the head is barely wider than the neck. You're definitely not going to get that old triangular head. Um, and they have short fixed fangs at the front of the mouth. Now, one of the things people get wrong, a mistaken idea that some people have, is that they have to chew on you to envenomate you. And that is not true. A coral snake, like if you pick it up, for example, you should never do that, of course. If you pick it up, it could whip around and bite you and envenomate you like right then. So don't think it has to hang on and chew. If it's eating a lizard or a snake, it will hang on and chew to make sure the thing doesn't get away. But it's not that they have to do that in order to envenomate. And they have neurotoxic venom. So their venom has very little in the way of anything that's going to be give you swelling or bruising or the other stuff. It's mainly going to attack your nervous system. And let's see, should we talk about that rhyme now? Maybe. In just a second, we will. Here's an example of a really pretty East Texas coral snake. So let's go ahead and talk about the rhyme. The rhyme that people, and I don't want you to forget it as soon as I say it. I want you to not rely on it. The rhyme is red and yellow kill a fellow, and red and black venom lack. So if it's a milk snake, a kind of similarly patterned animal, the yellow bands touch only the black. They're isolated by the black. They don't touch red. But if the red and yellow bands touch, then it's venomous. Now, here's why I want you to forget that rhyme. I want you to forget it because you notice this animal's got a fair amount of black in those red scales. Some coral snakes have so much black that it almost doesn't look red at all. I've seen them that are just black snakes with yellow bands. And genetically, they can get really weird. I've seen a photo of one that had a yellow stripe and it was just a black snake. So don't rely on that pattern thing because the coral snakes can be weird and not comply with it. And here's the other thing. Usually, if I find one of these snakes in the wild, either a coral snake or a milk snake, they don't sit still for you very well. This snake, Clint and I worked with this snake for a minute to get it still for a photograph. Its first impulse was just get off the road, get off the road, get away, get away, get away. And when they're in motion, you can't tell what touches what. So the rhyme is no good at all. Here's the deal. If you see a relatively small, slender snake with a bright pattern like this, with reds and yellows and all that, stay back from it a little bit. And it doesn't matter if it's a milk snake or a coral snake, because coral snakes are extremely not aggressive and will simply try to get away from you. And if you don't step on it or pick it up, there's so little chance that it's going to bite you. So just keep your distance and don't worry if it's venomous or not. These are in Cedar Hill, and there's a lot of people that live in Cedar Hill, right? You don't get many coral snake bites in Cedar Hill. That's because they're very shy. They're under leaf litter. They're hidden. People don't see them that often, and unless you pick them up or step on them, they're basically not going to bite you. And once again, I got to remind you, you never lose your respect for that snake and never pick it up and never get too close. There's another story I want to tell you. What's the next slide here? Yeah. So here's one other thing about coral snake. Well, no, we'll get to the venom in a minute. Let me tell you about a couple of other just snake natural history things. So let's talk about how snakes move. Um, the way that we all kind of think about it is that S-curve movement, and that's called lateral undulation. And I can't get my head around it. If you can, more power to you. We are put together with legs and arms so that we can't imagine sending a wave of muscle contractions down our body to push against whatever's there and move us along, right? If you try and think about what would that feel like, I bet you can't imagine it. At least I can't. And if you can, cool, that's great. But that's what they do is they send a wave of contraction down the body to push against whatever's there and move themselves forward. Now I'm going to show you this milk snake. We were just talking about that whole milk snake, coral snake thing. You notice this snake, the yellow pattern does not touch the red. So it does conform to the rhyme, even though forget the rhyme. But at any rate, I want to show you how the snake moves. In the video, you're first going to see it move slowly a little bit, and then you're going to see it notice that we're there and take off. And both of what you're going to see really kind of matches lateral undulation. The first part, you can barely see any loops of the body. It's not very S-shaped. But if you look carefully, I want you to watch carefully at any sticks, any little pine needle clumps, and see that snake pushing against it as it moves. So it's going to turn and it's going to move just like water. It's just such a beautiful, graceful flowing, but it's pushing against stuff. And now lateral undulation, and it's slipping on the sand, right? It's actually doing something that we call slide pushing because it can't really get a purchase on the sand, but it's doing the S curve thing, pushing against the sand. Here's the rest of how snakes move. One of them is called concertina movement. A concertina is an old-fashioned kind of accordion, and so you squeeze it together and out, together and out. And these snakes do that. They bunch up the body. So let's imagine a bull snake in a rodent burrow. It will anchor the back part of the body, bunch it up and push against the burrow while extending the front part forward. And then when it gets forward a little bit, it will anchor itself at the front, pull itself up, and then repeat the whole process. So it's like a concertina, push, pull, squeeze together, extend, squeeze together, extend. Snakes use that in an underground burrow, or they may use it in tree climbing. You can see videos of a snake wrapping around a tree trunk, extending up, grabbing it, wrapping around, and pulling the rest of the body forward, and that's concertina movement. Sidewinding is what our desert sidewinder. It's a type of rattlesnake, not in Texas, but out west of here in the Mojave Desert, you can see sidewinder rattlesnakes. And you noticed in this snake, when it tried to go fast, it couldn't do it much because it slipped on the sand. Well, the rattlesnake solves that by lifting a section of the body off the ground, throwing it to the side and kind of forward, and then clumping it down on the ground, and it contacts the sand, and it mainly pushes downward, and so the body doesn't slip in the sand. So it's basically throw a part of your body to the side and forward, come down on a new place, push and move yourself forward. That's what sidewinding is like. And then rectilinear movement, rather, I mentioned it with that copperhead. You move in a straight line, look like a caterpillar. What happens is that at multiple points on the belly, some muscles pull the belly scales upward and forward, while the other ones anchor the body, and then they'll push the rest of the body forward. And so it's like all those little contact points with a caterpillar, only there's no little legs. It's just places on the body where the muscles push and move it forward in a straight line. Okay, so that's snake movement. If you're having any questions, I hope you're putting them in chat or hanging on to them, and we'll come to them for sure. Okay, so how about how snakes do their mouths? There's that other story that people have, this belief that snakes somehow unhinge their jaws, or like, how do they eat something so enormous, right? How could they possibly do that? And they feel like it must be that the snakes like dislocate their jaws or something. Well, here's how they do it. This is a kind of a diagram, again, from the Wildlife's book, a diagram of a rattlesnake head. Um, and you see on the left, there's this bone called the quadrate that connects the jawbone to the skull. And it's like you get an extra hinge that gives you a bigger gape. So that enables the jaws to open wider. And in the front, the jaws are not fused. You remember I mentioned that with that glass lizard, the jaws are fused. You can't spread the jaws wide. He just has to munch little stuff and swallow it. These guys, the jaws are connected by a ligament. They're not fused and they can spread wide. So what happens is, in the diagram on the right, the snake is eating a rat. You can kind of see through the rat to see where the jaws are. What happens is that the mouth is designed to hook and hold, not to tear or cut. And so the right side, for example, the muscles will move the jaws on the upper and lower. They move it forward, and then they bite down and grab the rat and pull. And at the same time that those pull, the other side of the head relaxes, extends forward, and gets a new hold and pulls. So the snake kind of walks over this rat by left, right, pulling that rat down the gullet. That's how they eat. And again, if you have any questions, we'll talk about those in a bit. I'm going to really quick do this. This is a really cool book for any of you that have serious interest in snakes. The Rattlesnakes of Arizona. Even if you don't go to Arizona, there's some very cool stuff in here. And one of them I've kind of borrowed a little of. This is Harry Green's observations. Now, Harry Green is a guy actually from Texas, a really renowned snake researcher. Um, his observations and discussion of the behavioral complexity of rattlesnakes. And I'm going to just read the highlighted stuff really quick. This is from a chapter called Social Behavior of Rattlesnakes, A Shifting Paradigm. And so they're talking about these rattlesnakes are more complex than we ever would have expected. Like when I was younger, people would talk about, even people that like snakes would say, they're dumb as a rock. And that's not true. Okay, so Harry worked with free-living black-tailed rattlesnakes, and they were watching this one snake and observing it position itself to ambush a rodent on the trail. Oh, whoops, wait a minute. No, the first thing is talking about maternal behavior. So it says the big surprise came one July morning when Dave found that rather than having dispersed, the 6 newborns can't see because of, hang on, were clustered around their basking mom, with whom they remained for 10 days before one by one shedding their skins in front of her. And in that time, before they shed their skins, the moms will like pull the babies back in they don't let them go. And then after that first shed, they usually, then they start dispersing. So that's really like maternal behavior. That's maternal protection. We don't want to anthropomorphize, right? It's not like we're saying, mom says, "Oh, baby, come here, let me hold you." But it is some maternal protection that we wouldn't have known they had. And now the other part that I was thinking about, they were watching this black-tailed rattlesnake waiting to ambush a chipmunk along a trail. And the snake noticed, I'm being anthropomorphic, noticed what they did is that they they're watching through binoculars. They see this dried fern that's blocking his view. And so what happens is that the snake extends his head and neck like a shepherd's crook forward and then grabs the frond and pulls it out of the way so he can see. Now, wow, talk about some problem solving. That is really cool stuff. So anyway, the point here is that snake behavior is more complex than we know. Uh, Maybe the pit vipers are the more advanced. Maybe some of the other snakes are not as smart. But basically, we should be careful about deciding how smart they are. They don't do things that tell us that they're smart all that obviously, but they got some smarts. Okay, let's talk about venomous snake safety. When you're out in the field. So this part would be for even somebody who's here that doesn't really like snakes, but they're out birding or they're out doing stuff. Watch where you step and put your hands. Like just kind of get in the habit of never putting your hands where you can't see them. If you're gonna step over a log, take a stick and knock the log or poke down on the ground on the other side of the log before you step over, because timber rattlesnakes and some other snakes may get in an ambush position on one side of a log waiting for a rodent to come along. And if you step over and surprise the snake might decide it has to bite you. So, check where you're stepping, check where you're putting your hands. Um, the next one, uh, like I really feel strongly about this. Please, nobody, even if this presentation makes you more interested and you really want to get out there and see some venomous snakes, please don't go out there and get yourself a hook and start like messing with venomous snakes. That's like one step away from the guy says, hold my beer, right? And that's how a lot of venomous snake bites happen, is people who they want to play with them. They're not really ready to do that yet, but they really want to. And then surprise, something happens. So please don't do that unless you need practice and you need mentoring. You need to hang around with somebody that already knows how to do it and learn how to hook snakes and move them, see when they can ride the hook and when they're just going to try to get away from you, and just kind of learn that whole thing about how you use a snake hook or tongs. And obviously, don't pin and pick up the snake. It's very stressful for the snake. It's very dangerous for you. You're going to see them old cowboys do it out in the rattlesnake roundup, and none of us, hopefully, want to do anything like the guys in the rattlesnake roundup, right? So please don't pin and pick up snakes. Um, that's really an accident waiting to happen, and it's really bad for the snake. So you can observe and photograph from about 8 to 10 feet away if you have secure footing, and you can move further away if you need to. Here's what I mean. You're out there and you turn over a piece of plywood, and you're right up by some possum haw or some shrub where you can't get away from that board, right? You're right there by it. And you lift up a board with a hook, please, or a stick. Please don't do that with your fingers. And there's like a rattlesnake under it. Uh, you need to move away. Like that's not really safe. But if it's in an open area and you discover a snake, you find it under something, or you just see it crossing the trail. And if you're 8 or 10 feet away, and if you needed to, you could back up or step out of the way, then you're okay. You can take photos and be careful and watch that snake a little bit. And here's where the chasing thing sometimes comes in. People that have this mistaken idea that snakes chase you. Uh, this happened to Steve Campbell and me years ago. I'd taken him out and he found his first Massasauga out on the road. And so he was absolutely fascinated. And we're looking at this snake on the road, and the snake is under a light and it can't see what's going on. And it's just freezing in place and hoping we go away. But then when I touched it, because I wanted to get it to shift position and see it from a different angle, it was really stupid. I should have said, hey, Steve, let's both of us step back a little bit. I'm going to touch the snake. Nah, I just reached over and touched the snake with the hook. And we're both kind of crouched down, and that was really stupid. So the Massasauga flies into action, trying to get away, and it goes straight for Steve. And Steve basically does a backflip. which is not exactly what happened, but Steve did get out of the way. But the reason it was stupid is we were crouching and it would make it awkward. And if one of us had fallen or whatever, we could have been bitten. And it's really bad. That snake looked like it was chasing Steve. But here's what happened. As soon as Steve stepped out of the way, the snake kept right on going and moved on to where it knew safety was. That's what was happening. The snake needed to get to a place that it knew was safe. So sometimes when they take off, if they decide, oops, this isn't safe for me anymore, and they take off, they go fast and they're not using good judgment about what's in front of them. So they may come toward you. And if it does that, doesn't happen very often, but if it does, you need to step back or step out of the way, and then you're going to be fine. Um, so I have a guide for the North Texas venomous snakes at the Lives in Nature website. Um, if you go to my blog, my website, livesinnature.com, and there's a page for natural history, and then there's a subpage for herpetology, and you can download that. It's got photos of all of our local venomous snakes and some natural history about what they're like. So if you need that, you can download that, and it's free and all that. So let's talk about snake bite and venoms and all that. Um, so I guess we'll first start talking about first aid. Uh, and the thing to do there is if you're out in the field and somehow through some terrible bad luck, you got bitten, first of all, take any rings off. If you have a ring on your finger or maybe a bracelet that could get tight, take it off because if it's a pit viper, it's going to swell promptly and it will swell so that you cannot get that ring off. And it will be like a tourniquet and cause a lot of damage and they'll have to cut it off at the ER. So take off any jewelry, anything that is very constricting to that area that was just bitten. Now you can take a photo of the snake, but don't kill or transport the snake. And as I'll mention in a minute, you don't really have to take a photo. Don't worry if you're afraid. Whoops, I'm not sure what the snake was. It's okay. It should be okay if you're competently treated. If you can take a quick photo, that's fine. My God, I did a talk once for Cook Children's, their ER people, and I discovered this, and I've since, like, talking to Spencer Green and other snake, physician experts, this happens more often than we would like to think, that ah, somebody captures and takes the friggin' snake with them to the emergency room. Like, oh my God, what were they thinking? So please, please, please do not take the snake alive or dead. You may know, you probably know that if the snake was run over or if you killed it, if it's like well, any of our venomous snakes, basically snakes die slowly, and they can be mortally wounded and effectively dead, in the head even cut off. And with the right tactile sensation, if you pick it up, if you do something with the head, it can turn and bite you and envenomate you. So don't even take a dead snake to the ER. If you can't take a photo real quick, blow it off and get going. All you need is keys and somebody to drive you to the hospital. That's what you need. The saying that is worth remembering that the experts have is time is tissue, meaning in a pit viper bite, the longer it's untreated, the more damage it does. So the quicker you can get to an ER, the better off you are. So pit viper envenomation. So we're talking about copperheads, cottonmouths, rattlesnakes. It's a complex concoction of proteins that do several things. And some of them attack blood vessels and make blood vessels leaky and attack the blood. Some of them attack muscle. Some of them will attack some connective tissue. You will get bruising and swelling and bleeding and lots of pain. A guy I interviewed one time on a copperhead bite said that the very first thing is it was like he got stung by a red wasp. It was like that kind of bright stinging pain at first, and rapidly progressed to something deeper and worse. And it's sort of like if somebody just hits you on the finger with a hammer. So it's more of that kind of pain from the pressure and from the tissue damage. Um, Now, keep in mind that death from snakebite is extremely rare. So if you were to be bitten, you can basically almost say, okay, this is survivable. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to die. But you need to get to where there's good treatment because, again, the bite it's unpleasant and damaging if it's untreated. And if it's really untreated, it actually could be, some of them could be fatal. So, so that's the pit viper venom stuff. It's going to give you those kinds of effects. Now, coral snakes, on the other hand, that venom is neurotoxic, and our Texas coral snakes are, I don't know of a case of fatality. Maybe somebody could dig around and find something. Uh, One fatality I found in the literature, and this was, I think, an eastern coral snake. Some guys, this is like nobody here is going to do this, so it's like, nah, I don't have to worry about that. The guys were drunk, and so they took a broken beer bottle. They discovered this coral snake and tried to kill the coral snake with a broken beer bottle, and the guy got bitten, and then he declined treatment. He just went without treatment, and so he died. And that's really sad, but those are things that most of us would never do. If a kid, especially in Southeast Texas, a kid finds a coral snake and thinks it's pretty and picks it up and gets bitten and goes to the hospital, it's probably going to be very painful. That neurotoxic venom may make you feel like you stuck your finger in a light socket. It is likely to cause what's called a paresthesia, which could be anything from numbness to tingling to uh, bad pain of that sort. And you're not going to get much swelling, and you're probably not going to get very many symptoms beyond that. I mean, I don't want to tell you that a coral snake is no big deal, but the Southeast Texas coral snakes, there's basically not much of a fatality rate from those, and generally people don't need antivenom, and they're going to need to go to the hospital and be managed for that pain. And what they will watch is they will watch for any weakness, what they call objective weakness, which would be if your eyelids are drooping, you can't talk clearly because your muscles aren't working right. And the scary thing would be if your breathing started to get impaired and you might need assistance breathing if it was a bad neurotoxic bite. You're generally not going to have that, is what the literature says. Now, my standard disclaimer is like, I'm not a physician, so I don't want to tell you this stuff and have you think, well, Dr. Michael said. What I'm doing is I'm talking about stuff that I've read from physician experts and seen online from physician experts, not from some funky YouTube thing, but actual physician experts and from the research literature. So that's why I'm telling you this stuff. The North Texas coral snakes might be a little worse, but not much. So if you were bitten by a North Texas coral snake, go to the hospital, but it's probably going to be okay, but it may be really painful. Okay, so I want to tell you about, I need to update my slide probably. The Snakebite 911 app is almost like you don't need to bother with that anymore. But the cool thing about that app, it's a phone app for free. You download it from the people that make um, Crofab, the antivenom for pit vipers, and it will prompt you to take photos of the bitten area on your way to the hospital, so that you document how the swelling is progressing, and that's important. That's very helpful to know. It will prompt you to take a photo of the snake if you can safely do it. It will give you a list of hospitals that stock Crofab. Now that's their brand of antivenom. There is another one in recent years, stuff from the Anavip is the other one I know, and that's from Mexico. Anavip is very good. Anavip would, from what I've read and the people that I've listened to that really know their stuff, Anavip would be every bit as good as Crofab, but the Snakebite 911 ain't going to tell you where you can get Anavip. It will tell you where you can get Crofab. But at any rate, here's what I think is even better, and that's the Facebook group, the National Snakebite Support Group. Now, unlike most of Facebook, which is crazy town, right? This is a group you can join, but you very infrequently can you comment, because if somebody who is bitten can post on Facebook, like, or maybe they can say, "My son was just bitten. We're on the way to the hospital. What do I do?" And they can remind you of that kind of stuff. They can also help advise the people at the hospital, because here's the scary thing. It's scary for somebody like me that's out in the field a lot and messing with, I mean, safely, hopefully, knock on wood, messing with venomous snakes to like get them off the road. I'm a little bit more at risk of a venomous snake bite. And a lot of physicians have no experience treating snake bite, and they had very little training in med school. And so they may they may remember the old days when antivenom had really bad side effects, and they'll tell you, "I'm not giving you antivenom because the side effects are as bad as the bite," and that's mistaken. Or they'll tell you, "Oh, it's just a copperhead. I'm not giving you antivenom." There's plenty of research saying that antivenom will lessen the damage done from a copperhead bite. They may tell you, "I'm not going to elevate the limb," because they're in the mistaken impression that if you elevate the limb, the venom's going to like rush down the limb to the heart and kill you. Um, and that's simply not true. And there's plenty of research evidence that says if you elevate the bitten leg or arm, you get a lot less swelling, a lot less pain. Um, the venom doesn't sit there and eat away the tissue as badly if you elevate the limb, and it's not going to like it travels through the lymphatic system slowly. It's not going to rush to the heart and kill you. So these guys can help advise you. These are physician and toxinologist experts that could advise you or advise a physician, and nobody else is allowed to. So the guys that are they just desperate to comment on their rights, like my cousin got a bite, and here's what he done. He shocked it with a car battery, and that stuff's not going to happen on there because they're not allowed to post on there. So it's really a really good resource. Now, I'm making fun of the car battery thing, but let me tell you, there's some things that people used to believe or sometimes believe that you don't do, and one of them has to do with a car battery. So let's start with the old-fashioned thing of cutting and sucking, right? So used to when I was a kid, you could buy, actually you can still buy a snake bite first aid kit that has a razor blade kind of thing and a little bulb to suck out the venom. And the problem is that you cut that bite area and you just worsen the injury, and then you try to suck out venom and it really doesn't get any venom out to speak of. There's even newfangled things, those little Sawyer extractor things. Some of you have seen those, right? Some of you might have one, and it claims that it would, uh, when you trigger the suction thing on a little cup, it's supposed to suck out venom, and it will suck out some serosanguinous fluid. Might make you think it's doing some good. They actually did. Some of the docs did some research. It's the coolest research study title I've ever seen on a research study, and that is that venom extractors don't remove venom; they just suck. And that is the situation. They will suck some lymph fluid, but they're not going to get the amount of venom removed by any of those extractors is not enough to make a difference. So please don't do any of that, and you can throw your extractor away. The other thing that people talk about is putting ice on it. The experts can tell you that a little bit of cold compress will help with pain if it's alternated and not left on for any length of time. It may be helpful for pain, but if you pack it in ice or get it real cold and leave it like that, that is damaging and it doesn't help at all. So please don't pack it in ice. Please don't do that. Um, so let's see, what's the other thing? Um, so one of the things was to, and This was evidently so the inside story I got is this was a podiatrist traveling in South America. Okay, so a foot doctor, so not exactly super qualified to do this. And he observed some snake bites. And what he observed is people shocking the bite site with electricity. And some of the people did pretty okay. Well, the snake may not have been properly identified, and a lot of snakes down there are non-venomous, just like ours. So maybe there's never any venom to start with, and that's why it looked okay. But he came back to the States and he wrote it up. And again, my inside source says it was Field and Stream. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so he wrote this up, and the story started to circulate that if you shock it, the electricity will like neutralize the venom or something. So when the right people started really looking at it carefully with science, they found nope, none of that's true. Simply not true. It doesn't do a dang thing except it will shock you and just worsen your injury. So please don't shock it. Really, all you need to do is get to a hospital and advocate for yourself if you're not sure. Like if you're out in the field a lot, you might want to learn about snakebite enough that you can advocate for yourself if you don't think you're getting proper treatment. So that is, it's 9. Oh my gosh. So I said earlier it was going to be longer, and it was, but at least we finished on time. I want to stop sharing and see if any of you have any questions, anything from the chat that we should address. So, I don't see any questions. Do any of you have any other? Let's see.
Yeah, Michael, scroll on up. There's some questions.
Okay. All right. Yeah, here we are.
Or down, whichever way.
Yeah. Right. Right. Okay. So, please tell us what the diet of the rattlesnake is. Uh, so, um, depending on the species and size, um, a baby like pygmy or Massasauga is going to eat like lizards and frogs. I don't know if they take any arthropods at all. It's surprising how few snakes actually eat arthropods. But what I do know is that they would eat frogs and lizards, and then begin to transition to mammals and birds as they get older, or for larger species. A baby western diamondback can eat a mouse, and so if they find a mouse nest and can raid that mouse nest, they'll eat that. So that's what they eat. Don't the juveniles have green? Yeah, good point, Lulu. So copperheads and cottonmouths um, will have, and they do some caudal luring. What that means is using the tail as a lure. So if you look at a baby copperhead, it'll have like a sulfur yellow tail, and they can sit there and wiggle that tail, and like a frog might come up or a lizard, thinking, "Oh, I'm getting a worm! Yay, I got food!" And instead they become lunch. So that's caudal luring. And then as they get older, the copperhead's tail is going to turn greenish. Um, and I think they don't use it for luring anymore. I'm not positive, but I know the babies do. The news story about a guy in Houston who picked up a coral snake and was bitten. He dropped it, but then picked it up by the tail. Oh, it got bitten by in the other hand. Oh my Lord. I'm so sorry. And from the stories I've heard about how much coral snake bites hurt, there was a kind of a natural consequence there, right? I've heard that those things are really, really painful, even if they're not deadly, really painful. Let's see. Uh, Identification. Okay, there's Jan posting the link to the herpetology page and the article about the Houston guy. A link to that. Thanks, Lulu. That's cool. And and what species will eat bird eggs? Well, one of them is the western rat snake. The rat snakes, the bigger rat snakes, are sometimes called chicken snakes, and that's the reason they're called chicken snakes, is because they will raid the hen house if you let them, or if they get a chance. So they will raid bird nests and eat bird eggs as well as fledglings. There's a few others, and I can't off the top of my head think of another. Like I think bull snakes will sometimes. Any of the larger snakes might eat birds' eggs if they get a chance, but it's not a real common, real big part of the diet. So I'm not remembering it off the top of my head. Anything else? I feel like even at 2 hours, oh my gosh, I feel like I've been talking too quick, too fast, cramming too much in there. I hope it was okay and not too much. I apologize for that long thing about snake scientific names. I know that most of you is like, yeah, I don't care. But I hope it was helpful. Any other questions before we go?
I've got one, Michael.
Yeah,
Um, the colored lizard that you showed that was
yeah,
such a gorgeous turquoise color,
yeah.
was that breeding color or is that their
They-
normal all the time color?
They're always pretty. That was in April that I took that photo. So that could have been partly breeding colors. They get real bright and super pretty in breeding coloration. They do get brighter, but they're always kind of that color. The males more so than the females. Actually, they're both really pretty lizards, but males more of that pattern than females. And the males all the time kind of pretty, but super pretty when they're breeding.
Is that kind of I mean, it seems like mostly they pretty much try to blend in, but that that color doesn't look like it blends in much.
Yeah. Excuse me. When you see those guys sitting on the top of a boulder out there, they don't look like they care about crypsis, right? They don't look like they care about blending in at all. Um, Obviously, there's some birds, there's some other animals that could predate those guys, but among the smaller stuff, they're kind of top predator. It's like, nah, I'm fine. I don't care. So yeah, they don't blend in very well.
Thanks.
Sure. I miss the days that you could go out, in west of Benbrook and see one, but not anymore. Remember that next time the theme is going to be conservation. I'm going to get into detail about some of the species that are in big trouble and some of the ways Texas identifies endangered stuff, how the feds and the states protect stuff or fail to do that. There's some really interesting animals. One of them that's been in the news lately, it gets in the news periodically, is the Dunes sagebrush lizard. That's a lizard I'm really interested in. We'll talk about those and some other things. So next time is conservation, and I look forward to seeing you then. I hope to see you then.
Thank you, Michael.
Sure, you bet. Thank you all. I really appreciate your being here.